Welcome, everyone. I'm Robert Macheco, co-founder of the INSEAD AI community. Any INSEADers can join the community via the private INSEAD AI LinkedIn group, and from there access our 18 spaces. Fabio Valle, co-founder, is fielding questions. Feel free to add them from now in the chat. We've had hundreds of people sign up for today's meeting, so clearly the topic's of great interest. Before we start, I wanted to mention that INSEAD professor Annette Aris from the Corporate Governance Center and others are hosting live and online courses entitled AI for Boards, Strategies for Effective Oversight. We'll add details in the chat for you to check that out. So today we are joined by Fawad Bajwa, who is an INSEAD MBA. Based in Toronto and New York, Fawad is a managing director and partner of Russell Reynolds Associates, the renowned global leadership advisory and executive search firm. So Fawad leads the global AI practice and the global operations transformation practice. So big role. And is therefore the perfect person for today's topic. And our topic is Boards and C-Suites, AI's transformative impact on global leadership. Fawad advises boards, CEOs, CHROs, COOs, leadership and succession across sectors, including tech, life sciences, and financial services. His career started in robotic engineering, so we will hopefully have him back at some point to discuss how we find gainful employment with our robot overlords. But that's in the future. So today, let's talk about AI's impact on leadership and organizations. Fawad, you've written about the systems view of AI transformation. What does it mean for a company to be AI ready today? Is it about people, data, structure, or something else?
Thank you, Robert. And it's a pleasure to be here, especially with my alma mater. It's certainly been a journey for us before we got to the systems view of AI transformation. Just to give you a little bit of background, we've been working in this space since 2017 when I joined Russell Reynolds. And at that time, it was a pointed effort in the sense of we could see, based on conversation with clients, especially tech clients, as well as some clients that play in the NLP space, that they were looking for these leaders. But it was still a pointed effort in certain parts of their organization. And so over the last 3 years, we've seen such a strong interest that it's become a broader question around what does this mean for organizations? And so we've been on this journey with several professors in terms of creating this systems view of AI transformation. It starts off with reimagining your business. And the idea there is that if you're in a traditional business today, you may want to get into a business that looks very different from the business you're in. And this is where you get the help of the traditional management consulting firms. It's not necessarily what Russell Reynolds plays, but it starts with that. It starts with a vision for what your organization wants to be in several years from now. And then from there on, you've got to do a leadership enablement exercise for your organization. And there's 4 parts of this. The first one is CEO enablement. And this is where CEOs need to have what we call an AI cabinet around them, both with internal and external experts that are going to help them think about this on an ongoing basis. Today, this is not a foreign concept. 2 years ago, it was. Several Fortune 100 companies have these AI cabinets or AI committees of sorts that meet on a regular basis. It's not just about the executive team. It's about, they could be people 2 or 3 levels down in the organization that have had a head start in terms of having a view on this topic, or they could be consultants that are brought in to give them a view in terms of what the art of the possible is. Secondly, it's around your C-suite and what do your C-suite functions look like in the future. So if we take a step back and think about how organizations over the years have developed their functions, they've been silos. You've got a finance function, marketing function, HR function, etc. In the world we're moving in, there are decisions that can be made several layers down because of AI agents that can speak to each other without decisions needing to bubble up and make the optimal decision at the top. That's just an example, but we think the C-suite functions will evolve, and to think about that as you think about succession planning. The third piece is around your boards. And we're not necessarily suggesting you add AI experts to boards because there's not enough of them. That's a separate point. But certainly adding systems thinkers to boards that will help you envision what the art of the possible is for your business and push the management's thinking. And there's lots of examples of companies that have done that several years prior to becoming companies that are squarely focused on data and analytics. And lastly, from a leadership perspective, is around helping create an innovation culture. There was a study that was just released by MIT, talked about how 95% of AI projects fail. And as you dig deep into it, the challenge is quite strongly highlighted in terms of leadership and culture. And so, how do you bring that cultural transformation in an organization? That's the leadership piece. In parallel, there's certainly, of course, the technology element, which is around having the right platforms, having the right data infrastructure, and having the right governance models around it so you can really harness this opportunity.
It's great that you've given a framework to think about this. I guess you've gotten busy over the last few years.
It certainly has. It was more of an uphill battle if I go back 7, 8 years ago in terms of convincing clients and sometimes even colleagues. If we've got folks joining us today from consulting firms, they will appreciate that it was a real challenge convincing senior colleagues in the organization to think about this as a topic that they should even take to their clients because it wasn't top of mind. Over the last 2 to 3 years, it's gone from board members not knowing what questions to ask to now asking so many questions around it that management teams really feel like they're on the hot seat and they need to have the answers required, which typically means investments in either technology or people to be able to get to where they want to.
Excellent. So, Fawad, the AI quotient you helped develop is gaining traction. How does it help companies assess and grow leadership capability?
Thank you, Robert. Seems like you've done a lot of reading based on the content we've published, which I appreciate. One of the questions that we were getting frequently from companies over the last 2 years was, we're not going to just do a mass replacement of our teams, nor that we're suggesting that. How do we identify where our strongest leaders are to be able to lead through this journey? And then on the flip side, the ones that are strong leaders more broadly, how do we identify the gaps in terms of their ability to do, and then, of course, help them to cover those gaps? As you can imagine, it starts with identifying your blind spots so you can actually take care of them. We defined a competency model where we use cognitive assessment testing to test for systems thinking, curiosity and adaptability, drive and resilience, social intelligence, values and aspirations. And the last one, and I think this one's critical, is their wider impact and legacy. And why I say this wider impact and legacy is critical, I really feel like it's the bow on top of the other competencies. There are certainly different types of leaders. Many CEOs, when they go into a role, they want to make sure that while they have the steering wheel and they're in the driver's seat, they hold it steady and they leave an organization better than where they got it. But most importantly, they don't want to risk a situation where you drive the shareholder value down. The challenge with that is if you're not really driven by a legacy play or aspire to have a wider impact, you're not going to take as many risks. And what we find is, given the space we're in, this is an element of not being the fast follower, but the one that's going to lead, given the way this technology rewards leaders versus laggards. So that becomes a crucial piece. Beyond that, we also assess for their AI experience in terms of where they've had the opportunity to reimagine businesses or business processes, because this is a place where you do have to have a bit of a wholesale view of your business processes. How have they applied AI in transformation? How have they inspired teams in prior transformations, be it a digital transformation, in order to lead through a change? And then, and most importantly, how have they been able to work with broader tech teams in the organization? So again, the intent is not to assess AI leaders. The intent is to assess business leaders and ensure that they can help lead through an AI-led transformation.
Thank you. I hope everybody was taking notes. That was golden advice right there. You got views on how companies evaluate possible candidates for roles in AI. You might want to review this once we put it back online, update your LinkedIn a little bit. So now, Fawad, what role does trust and culture play in adopting AI at scale? How do you help clients build it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Trust is crucial for any cultural transformation, and it really starts with building an emotional buy-in. And before I get into specific, as I visit companies, I see the difference in terms of how they build this emotional buy-in from the broader employee base. I see big posters about new apps that are being launched. I see this as part of onboarding trainings, people, just like you do health and safety trainings, doing trainings on how they're going to use the internal chat GPT type of a system. There's this wave across the organization that says we're doing this and this is part of who we are, right? So there's this creating this emotional buy-in to say that this is part of the fabric of the organization. Specifically at the leadership level, I think there has to be an intellectual buy-in. Leaders need to feel that they can learn this stuff. And it's not going to be compartmentalized with a few AI champions. While they may be the experts, you can learn the basics. And just like INSEAD is, there's lots of universities that are getting cohorts of senior executive leadership teams who are coming in, who are experimenting. Russell Reynolds did that with our leadership team, experimenting with building AI agents and realizing that it doesn't take a lot of technical depth to be able to build something that's useful to you. What we're doing internally is we're actually, as opposed to selecting a handful, we've randomly selected folks in our firm across levels and put tools in their hands. And we have hackathons. Back in the day, hackathons were only for developers. Now, hackathon could be anyone who's assisting an executive with their schedule to doing research or an analyst or a partner. Like it could be anybody who could partake in this. We create a culture of you can also learn this. The second piece from a leadership perspective is realism around the expectations. What we're seeing is there's a bit of a pendulum swinging to the extreme where the expectations have gotten very high based on all the marketing that you see in the media around what the art of the possible is. It takes time and it takes a lot of effort for people to get up to speed and be able to deliver on this. The other element I'll cover is from an employee perspective. And when we talk about the wider base of companies, there needs to be an acknowledgement that there's a lack of AI knowledge and there's a support that's being provided, and not reprimand people that are not getting it or giving them the feeling of they're going to be left behind. There is a lot of fear around all of this change. And as you can imagine, change is always difficult. This is even more because it's surrounding folks that may not understand what this is. And of course, the fear of the unknown kicks in. There's a case study, I won't name the company, but there's a case study where a multi-million dollar data transformation project failed because several layers down, the people who were coding the data realized that if they coded the data correctly, eventually their jobs are going to be taken away. And so they started coding it. That's a whole other question around what you need to do in terms of building that buy-in all the way through the organization so people appreciate how this is going to help them in their jobs versus potentially taking away their jobs. So the challenge is very real.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of managerial challenges. BCG colleagues say that 10% is the AI, 20% is the data and systems around it, but 70% is the change management to get things to actually work. I guess that resonates with your personal experience.
It absolutely does. It's a funny thing that you remind me of. I used to be at Carney prior to joining Russell Reynolds 8 years ago. I recall in our decks, when we would do a Gantt chart of a project, there would be all these work streams, and then at the bottom there would be this like dotted line change management work stream, which was like faint, almost seemed like optional, right? And in the world we're living in, that change management piece really goes to the top, and you have to really emphasize that versus the tech build, because the tech build is becoming easier. Is the change management piece that is really difficult.
Hmm. Might lead into the next question. What do leaders often overlook when trying to scale AI? Where do most companies stall in their AI journey, and how do the best ones break through?
Great question, Robert. From a leader's perspective, I would say three things. The first one is change management, culture, and learning. Like that is super crucial. Most leaders underweight training, trust building, and new incentive structures that will enable folks to push through this. The second one is an appreciation that this is a wholesale process redesign effort. This is not an incrementalism play. I grew up as an engineer, very much focused on operations excellence and Six Sigma and finding that additional opportunity to increase margins. This is a real wholesale, take a step back and rethink how we do business today versus where we go tomorrow. And then lastly, it's really around the notional difference between problem selection versus tech fascination. Just because an LLM exists doesn't mean that you need to apply Gen AI. We spent a lot of time just explaining to clients at times that there's a difference between AI and Gen AI. Now I feel like a lot of people get it. But this fascination that we got to get a Gen AI expert, you may just need traditional machine learning and not need to apply Gen AI in your use case. So selecting the right problem versus getting fascinated by a technology on its own, it becomes a real deal breaker for leaders. From a company's perspective, I think the biggest challenge is the infrastructure. Your data quality and infrastructure needs to be in place so that you can really harness the potential here. The second one is around being stuck in what we call the pilot purgatory. Dozens of proofs of concepts have been put together by enterprise. Then at some point they just get stuck there, right? Like the people feel like they've done something, but they haven't been able to scale it. That's the watch out with center of excellences and this centralization of AI. We were talking about that, Robert, earlier. In terms of starting with a central organization does make sense for most companies because you do need to concentrate the effort. But at some point, it needs to get federated across businesses so that it gets closer to the actual business owners versus a central tech team that's leading it. But it is a bit of a journey. And the last thing I'll say is an appreciation for cost versus output. While there's a lot of expectation in terms of the easy use of these models, it's a real lift in terms of the initial investment. And we're seeing that with tech companies today. I think all traditional companies will go through that journey.
Fabio, there was a question from Vikrant. Maybe that fits you.
The first question is about if you can expand about what companies are doing regarding the governance model on AI.
I can give you from a leadership lens in terms of what they're doing. What we're finding are companies are investing in putting in more senior leaders who have a better understanding of the intricacies of the regulatory nature of what they're faced with. It used to be a topic that was quite junior, like data governance was a junior role that was in organizations and didn't see the light of day. We're seeing that getting more elevated.
Now to leadership strategy and governance. How is AI reshaping what it means to be a transformational leader across industries?
Yeah, I'll go back to what we shared around the AI quotient. But before we go there, some of the things that we assessed for prior to this AI revolution that we're going through doesn't change. We assess leaders on four key competencies in terms of what they've been able to deliver and what makes them as a holistic leader. The first one is setting strategy. The second one is executing for results. Third is leading teams. And fourth is building relationships and influence. In each one of these, we test for their ability to span across a range of leadership competencies. So, as an example, setting strategy, we assess for a leader's ability to span, depending on the situation, from being disruptive to pragmatic. So, each situation requires a different skill set. And naturally, some people lean one way or the other. But depending on where you lean, that gives you a sense of what kind of other leaders do you need to surround yourself by so that you can have a balanced view because maybe you're too disruptive and you need more pragmatic leaders around you so that you can balance it. Similarly, when it comes to executing for results, we look for a span between risk taking and being measured. right? So similarly, people will lean one way or the other. In leading teams, we look at heroic versus vulnerable. Some situations require a braveheart type of a heroic leader, and other situations require a consoler in general who will sit with you, appreciate, and empathize the situation you're going through. And then lastly, when it comes to building relationships and influence, we look for galvanizing versus connecting leaders, right? And so these spans we still assess for, and that doesn't change. So the broad model for assessing leaders still remains the same. What's changed now is we are looking more for growth factors. And we've got four growth factors that we look at. We look at people systems thinking, their curiosity and adaptability, their drive and resilience, and their social intelligence. So that's a view on, yes, you've got the ability to set strategy and lead teams and do all of these things, but can you now grow with that and certainly grow your organization with it? And then the last thing we do now more than ever is around potential realization. This goes back to having that wider impact and legacy play, self-knowledge, and then a real focus on values and aspirations. I connect that back to the question that was around governance. If you think about the ethical and governance maze that we're going through, if you don't have the right values and aspirations clear with yourself, you're going to be very confused as you go through in terms of what's right and what's not, right? So having that compass becomes more important now than ever before.
It's fascinating. So you're really helping companies and individuals have self-awareness. That you have to understand if you're more a disruptor or pragmatist and fill in gaps to make sure the whole enterprise succeeds.
Yeah, and the thing I found fascinating, Robert, is before I came to Russell Reynolds, I didn't know these psychometrics existed, right? When I first started experiencing them, I went through that exercise for myself, where we get assessed by an industrial psychologist using these psychometric tools. It's fascinating how the blind spots are identified and then you can create a plan to cover them. Sometimes the plan is you can get a coach and they can help you figure this out. Other times it is this is so extreme that you're not going to be able to do it yourself. The next leader you hire on your team, make sure that they spike on what you don't have so that you create that balance.
This system thinking, how do you define and how do you evaluate this?
So we use a cognitive test for that our industrial psychologist colleagues administer. If I give you a broad view of it, it's really around like taking somebody who takes an integrative, holistic approach to problem solving. They're tuned to patterns and intersection between underlying systems. And there's an element of your past experience that plays into it. Have you had very narrow roles versus the opportunity to work across departments and collaborate, which gives you a view in terms of what the potential repercussions are beyond your own purview? But beyond that, we certainly focus more on the psychometric testing.
For those aiming to join a board in the next few years, and many INSEADers aspire to this, what are the most important skills or experiences to build now?
As a firm, and based on what we've seen on our studies, we never propose a board member that is going to be a specific expert in one area. You need broad business leaders. Let me start there. It's the whole idea of a T-shaped view where you have certainly your expertise, but you can go across and talk about a whole set of issues that can impact an organization. This is why you've traditionally seen CEOs and very senior GMs and business leaders join boards. What we've started to see now is there's an appreciation for bringing more tech fluency to the board, specifically around AI and digital transformation. At times, our clients will ask for a deep AI expert on the board. We really need to help pull that apart and understand why do they want like a single-threaded AI leader on the board versus a broader business leader that brings AI and digital fluency. We've seen an interest in individuals that have had exposure to cybersecurity and resilience oversight. And that's, again, a topic that's very frequently in the news. It creates this angst around building some capacity and understanding around it. And the third thing I'll say is around geopolitical and regulatory awareness. We're living in a world where the geopolitical element has become a topic not only for where do you do business, but also around how do you manage your supply chain and trade risks. And so leaders that have dealt with those types of issues have got that global mindset and exposure by either running businesses that were global or living in places around the world. It can bring a view that organizations are looking for. Now, with that said, there are certain other elements that are very specific to each organization. For example, an experience in M&A and capital allocation that continues to be, depending on the organization, that continues to be an important piece. Human capital and culture stewardship, depending again on the scale of the organization, typically large organizations that are dealing with these human capital challenges or culture challenges will at times bring that on board. And then the last thing I'll mention is around crisis management and leaders that have dealt with a lot of activist issues. We see that being an interest for boards to add those.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I should mention, Robert, is
Yeah.
there is a concept of advisory boards as well, right? Even for large companies. Sometimes we think of advisory boards for smaller, earlier stage companies. But depending on what issue is ongoing, sometimes companies will, and a lot of Fortune 500 companies, as opposed to changing the composition of their corporate board, they will add an advisory board that focuses on a certain topic that they can tap into. And when it comes to AI and digital, we're seeing a lot more of that from our clients.
I'll sneak in a question from Liselotte from Sweden. Can you expand on how leaders and especially boards use AI themselves? It seems like some of the board portals are very backwards in functionality. What are leaders actually using?
And just to add to this, there are also a couple of INSEAD people that are creating startups to address these needs as well.
We haven't seen a wholesale shift yet. In the board meetings that I've attended, here are anecdotal examples of people using ChatGPT or GPT-5 specifically around creating a view of what the market is saying about the company. So a summarized view of that, because GPT-5 is quite good about tapping into external sources and thinking deeply around what the implications are. So board members are starting to use these tools and getting comfortable with using them. I do know that there are, and maybe INSEAD startups are part of those, there are startups that are being built around playing the role of a board member and asking the right questions to management teams and probing in the right places. As they say, for board members, you've got to be noses in and fingers out. And so, in that element, an AI tool could be quite useful. That is, asked once you give it all the content, it can digest it quickly and come back with the right questions. We just haven't seen that adopted at scale yet.
Still early days.
The potential is very obvious and real.
I think the underlying question was more related to the system, to the board systems. There are several analyses that says that board members don't read all the documents before taking decisions and so on and so forth. And around this topic, if you are informed, if you know what is happening, it's fine. If not, it's fine.
What I have seen is if they have like an internal chat GPT tool or internal instance of a tool like that, they use it to summarize and then probe the content to ask the right questions. You have to be careful of using publicly available tools when it comes to sharing that content. So that's the watch out that sometimes board members need to be educated on in terms of the potential implications of sharing that content on a publicly available system.
Okay. Now, what about the INSEADers that are listening? What advice would you give them as they navigate their career change or transformation amid so much technological uncertainty?
That's a big question, and there's a lot of elements that we can go after. I think the biggest thing, let me start with the thing I think about quite a bit. What timeless skills can you focus on, right? That are, regardless of what happens, they're going to be in vogue and required. I think there I would highlight three things. One is critical thinking. That never goes away, right? I think, in fact, especially as you think about younger generations coming into the workforce, you typically develop critical thinking through school. And then when you started work, you asked right questions, you were part of meetings, you took notes, you heard things, and that helped you develop your critical thinking further. As entry-level roles change, and they become less about those tasks and more about orchestrating and using agents to do your entry level job, This critical thinking skill set, and this is a real challenge for organizations right now, building this critical thinking skill set is going to become more difficult. So that still is going to be in vogue and is going to be required. Secondly, is around communication or communication skills more broadly. You may have seen those memes where there's a TikTok video around two people talking, but as opposed to talking to each other, they're talking to their chatbot, and then they're waiting for the chatbot to answer, and then they're communicating that answer to the other person, and that other person is like waiting for their chatbot to tell them what to say. And as people grow with these tools, my kids are in that category. I've got three kids, 7, 10, and 12, and they're already very fluent in terms of using a chatbot and asking questions. And they see that person as a member of the household because they can just press a button and ask questions. And it remembers everything that they talked about in the past and it has the context. So is that going to help them develop better communication? No, it's going to be a different set of communication. And so this human to human interaction and how do you build that is going to remain in vogue. And then the third thing I'll say is this the ability to build relationships. That again is not going to go away. You may not be able to build that skill set as you did in entry-level jobs. We already went through that in the digital revolution. We're going to be doing more of that with AI agents. As you do more of that, how do you develop that skill set if you don't develop in coming out of school? So I think that I would say are timeless skills that everybody should focus on. Beyond that, I think developing your own digital fluency is crucial. Even if that means I'm not necessarily suggesting everybody needs to go and start developing their agents, although I think they should because developing agents is super easy now. You do need to play with the tools. And I'll give you an example of how I recently used ChatGPT for planning a vacation. I had already planned the vacation. It was a long trip. We were doing trains from Istanbul to London. As you can imagine, there's lots of different connections and hotels and transfers. And we also had family members joining in different parts of this trip. So it was a lot of complicated pieces. I just needed a place to store all the information. So I spent one evening and I shared with our chat, we call him Leo. I shared all of this information with Leo. Then Leo became my thought partner because Leo remembered everything I shared with him. We conversed about the possibilities, what else we could do. And the thing that really changed my view on the possibilities was I was thinking about how do I get my kids to be excited about this bizarre trip with so many train rides and overnight trains. And for them, it's hotel, transfer, train, hotel, transfer, train. I asked Leo to write a story of three adventurers going on the Orient Express and exploring Europe. And now I created this storybook, which they all read. They got excited by because they were the heroes of their story and now they're going to live it, right? So when I talk about developing digital fluency, it's just using these tools in a way that helps you, and then you get more conversant with the art of the possible with these tools.
Excellent. So I have two more questions, and then we'll go to audience questions. I know there are a couple in there. Just note from Professor Aris, Annette Aris. By the way, her course link is in the chat as well. You can take a look at that. She says about board books that the providers, the large providers of the board books are starting to offer confidential Gen AI board material summaries for board members and board meeting question services. It's still early days, but she says the interesting question is, what's your value added left as a board member if these systems are doing it for you? Which leads me to my next question. How are expectations shifting for you? So how are expectations shifting in executive search today? What do companies now value more than they did 5 years ago?
That's a big question, Robert. There's a lot of nuances there, but I'll try to, in the classic INSEAD fashion, try to summarize it in three things. The first one is from a leadership perspective, we're seeing a lot more focus from placement to potential. So there's a lot more emphasis on assessing using psychometrics, testing, assessing for adaptability, the learning agility, the systems thinking, all the pieces that we talked about. We're seeing a big push towards that. Partly is because you need people that have the context of your business, and so the real push for solving for potential versus placements. Secondly, we're seeing a bigger focus on transition. So CEO transitions, if you look at the stats, the failure rates tend to be high when you bring in CEOs from outside, as well as the even internally constant musical chair that you're going through. The demand has grown for CEO transition support around executive coaching, culture advisory, having a real look at your team in terms of the dynamics of that team. And what we call our advisory services have just seen a real strong uptick in terms of the interest from the market. And the last piece are the broader mandates that are bespoke to clients in terms of what they're looking for. As an example, our private equity clients will typically retain us as part of the deal due diligence. Back in the day when I was at Carney, we would do the strategic due diligence in terms of working with the transaction team who would do the financial due diligence. So we do the leadership due diligence for private equity before they actually acquire the business so that they get a sense of how do these leaders stack up. It also gives them a view in terms of if they're going to, if they go through the transaction, what they want to do with with the individual leaders, which ones they want to swap out. Maybe they want to take one and put them in another business that they already own, etc. So those types of bespoke assignments are gaining more traction.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the insider view on what's happening in your industry. It's much more than just sharing some CVs for somebody to pick through. The last question before we go to audience questions. What gives you the most optimism about the future of leadership in an AI-shaped world, and what still concerns you?
Thank you, Robert. I get most excited by the digital literacy that we're seeing, everything from at the board level to the executive level. I'm seeing more directors have a better understanding of the fact that these tools exist, but also that they have risks associated with them. This is quite a big shift from the NACD conferences that I presented at several years ago versus where we are today. It's that fluency is getting better. Secondly, this emphasis on responsible AI frameworks. There's an appreciation for the governance. We got a question on that from this audience, which people just didn't appreciate several years ago, right? Governance, ethics, regulation that are being built around this gives me excitement. And the third thing I'll mention is the cross-functional collaboration we're seeing, as opposed to this being a topic that is centralized in one place and just stays there and the management team feel like they've checked the box. We're seeing CEOs ask more nuanced questions around the art of the possible and where they can deliver better shareholder returns. And so that is quite the journey that organizations have gone through and certainly is in the right direction. From a concerns perspective, the biggest business concern is the concentration of AI capability. As you can see, and in the examples I shared, if I compare like the top companies in this space versus the number 10, there is such a big difference. And even with number two, there's a strong enough difference. It's not like they're all close to each other, right? So there is an element of winner takes all in this space. Second one is around this hype cycle is going to distract from real value delivery. You may have seen this in this analysis around how when technology comes into play, there's a lot of the hype cycle that any technology goes through. The actual value comes years after, right? And so if people lose faith in it and start to deprioritize it, we'll really lose the potential. And then the third thing is around the ethical blind spots. And this is around bias. I see less conversation about that because we started to think that just because ChatGPT is not spitting out things that were considered racist or discriminatory, that the bias still isn't there somewhere. And so I think just keeping a spidey sense on from that perspective. And then lastly, from a societal point of view, I think this cognitive offloading and erosion of human skill, that's a real question mark. And I don't think anyone solved this yet, but that's a real question mark in terms of what does that mean for future generations. As I mentioned, I've got young kids, and as I see them going through, I do wonder, should they be using Leo frequently? Should they be using Leo for their assignments or not? Maybe they should, and maybe we shouldn't be so cautious. But what that means for their own learning is a question mark.
If I sum up some of your comments today, this is one of the key ones, I think. This cognitive offloading, how to make sure as your parent that your kids are not stuck in that they actually do learn critical thinking. And the second part and related is building relationships. We had the COVID years where a lot of kids lost physical contact with their peers and are texting and not necessarily even taking phone calls. How do you build the skills to build the personal relationships to make this all work? Fabio, questions from the audience?
Yes, there is a question from Kenny. I think that we replied to part of it already implicitly, but it's for board members inspiring to become fluent, more prepared, or take more front seat in the current era of AI. Are there any things they should be doing, like specific courses or example of project where they can participate? And
where do you learn, Fawad, and where do your colleagues learn about AI?
I get this question frequently because there's so many tools now. I can tell you what I do. There's a podcast, and I'm not affiliated with this podcast in any ways, but there's a podcast called The Daily AI Brief. It's excellent. It's just 25 minutes of daily news on what's happening in this space. It's quite on point. It keeps you current. It tends to be more business oriented, although they're connecting with a mass audience. So I think either that podcast or another one that you can pick, but that's my go-to tool. I do read a lot of these reports that come out from academic institutions like INSEAD or HBS, MIT, just to stay on top of the potential risks, gaps that are being identified. Because what you want to be mindful of is tech companies, because that's their job, are selling a product and a service. Media is typically eating it up and putting it out there. We've gone in this hype cycle where we're at the stage where really feels like everything can be solved by it. To find that balance, you need to look at academic research in terms of what's actually happening on the ground and look at case studies of where people have found returns versus more challenges.
Fabio, if there's other questions in a moment to ask, but before we close, I just wanted to mention again that INSEAD professor Annette Addis from INSEAD's Corporate Governance Center and others are hosting live and separately online courses entitled AI for Boards, Strategies for Effective Oversight. You'll find the details in the chat, the flyer. Do you have any final words of wisdom for us?
I think we live in a very exciting time in terms of what the art of the possible is. I think it's really important for us to not feel like we're looking outside in and jump into these tools and use them. Some of these are very easily available. One recommendation I would make to everyone is if you haven't used the agent mode in ChatGPT, try the agent mode. Give it some complicated tasks like go and find the best flight for me for a certain time, but also check that from this different sites and plug in these dates. And if you give it these tasks, you can actually see it going through and doing all that task. And so you start to see the power of agents. So my final thoughts are experiment with it for yourself. And that's the only way you'll start to appreciate the possibilities.
Excellent. We covered a lot of territory today. Thanks to everybody for joining. I'm looking forward to seeing some of you in San Francisco. We have a sold out event September 25th and 26th, and we will announce the AI 50 as well there, the 50 leaders in the INSEAD community on AI ahead of the AI Forum. Thanks all. See ya.
Thank you, everyone.